It's not often that politicians admit they were wrong, especially not under oath. But this time, even sleepy Cyril couldn't run away from the truth. After years of speeches, slogans, and promises about expropriation without compensation, the president of South Africa has finally admitted in a sworn affidavit, those books of his, that Article 19 of the Expropriation Act is unworkable, is vague, and self-contradictory. Let that sink in. The cornerstone of the ANC's so-called land reform revolution is legally unworkable by their own admission. Let's rewind for a second. The ANC introduced the expropriation bill, claiming it would fast-track land redistribution, correct historical injustices, and help the poor gain access to land. But when critics from parties such as the DA and VF Plus to AfriForum and even constitutional lawyers warned that the bill would undermine property rights, the ANC, the EFF, and Mkhonto weSizwe called them alarmists. They said, "Don't worry, comrade. The Constitution protects everyone." They said, "We'll do it responsibly." And yet now, under oath, Ramaphosa admits that the very section defining how disputes are handled doesn't even make legal sense. So here's the problem. Section 19 of the new Expropriation Act 13 of 2024 outlines what happens when the government and a property owner can't agree on compensation. It's supposed to create a fair process, but the timelines are a mess. One clause gives the government about 180 days to start a court action after notice of expropriation. Another clause gives the property owner 90 days to request the same action. Then another says the state must act within 180 days of that request, which overlaps with the first 180 days. But somehow, these are ANC things that only make sense in ANC land, because that's just the ANC. Even lawyers can't agree when the clock starts. Does expropriation happen before or after the dispute is settled? What if the state delays? What happens to the owner's rights during that time? Ramaphosa himself called it a circular process that renders the provision unworkable. In plain English, means it's practically broken law. Let's talk about what this kind of uncertainty does to an economy. According to AgriSA, since 2018, when expropriation without compensation became ANC's political obsession, obviously handed down from the EFF maniacs, South Africa has lost nearly 10 billion US dollars in agricultural investment due to investor hesitation. Land values in rural areas have dropped by up to 30% in some provinces because investors don't trust the government. This just signals a lack of trust in property rights. Foreign direct investment, which reached over 90 billion in 2018, fell to below 30 billion rand by 2023. A collapse that can't be separated from the uncertainty over expropriation. And who suffers most? Not the billionaires, not the politicians. It's ordinary black farmers, the smallholders who need secure title deeds to access credit, buy equipment, and grow their businesses. Land reform is supposed to empower people, paralyze the economy. We've seen this movie before. In 2018, the ANC promised to amend the constitution to allow expropriation without compensation. After millions of public submissions and months of hearings, the amendment failed in Parliament, even with EFF support, because it was legally indefensible. Then came the expropriation bill, version after version, trying to sneak the same idea through legislation instead of a constitutional change. They promised it would be clear and fair, but even their own president now admits it's a legal nightmare. This is the ANC's pattern. Promise radical change before elections, blame opponents when it doesn't work. It's style. We blame everything on apartheid and on the West because we are so crap at what we do, we will never take the blame. That's when you know you've got the problem. Let ANC admit one day that we are the problem, and just maybe they would have made some progress in solving the problems. But rather, they quietly admit failure was once damage of another administration, just like they did with ESCOM, where state control became corruption, just like they did with SAA, where transformation became collapse, and now with land economic justice became legal confusion. When opposition parties said this bill would scare off investors, the ANC said it was Western propaganda. But now the president's own lawyers are asking the courts to read in corrections because the law they drafted is unconstitutional. It's like setting your own house on fire, then calling the fire department to blame the architect. And while all this legal gymnastics is happening, 1 million hectares of state-owned land already under government control sits unused, unfarmed, mismanaged. That's land that could be leased, developed, or redistributed responsibly today. But instead, the ANC chose political theater over solutions. So maybe, just maybe, this is the ANC's quiet admission that ideology doesn't build nations, that slogans don't feed people, that you can fix inequality by destroying confidence, and you can't create justice through chaos. Cyril Ramaphosa's affidavit is more than a legal document. It's a confession of failure. It's the ANC's finally realized populism doesn't work, or perhaps it's just Ramaphosa. But like I said, populism doesn't work when it collides with reality. Because when the courts, investors, farmers, and even the constitution say no, there's no slogan strong enough to change that. So here's the truth. Land reform matters, but it must be constitutional, transparent, and economically sound. Otherwise, all we are doing is repeating the same cycle, false promises and self-inflicted wounds that have defined the ANC for 30-odd years, and that have just led to more unemployment, more injustices in society, more racial abuse against minorities, and a society that tilts towards communism, not understanding the dangers. Maybe now, after all the chaos, South Africa can finally start having an honest conversation, not about land expropriation, but about real land empowerment. This has been 10 Minutes with Kuhle, and if you love the content we produce, consider subscribing and signing up for membership. It is as cheap as 20 Rand. It helps to keep us on air. It helps to fund the work that we do. As you can see, we are traveling. So ladies and gentlemen, please do like, share, and subscribe. That's the least you can do, or you can buy me a coffee in the comments below. Really, really does go a long way. Till next time, Shabbat Shalom.